who is the Director of Digital and Data at Mijente, right? Amanda, it's your show.
Thanks so much. Excited to be here with you all in these wild times, and really grateful for everyone showing up. And that is the title of the lesson today, Why We Show Up. So real quick, just wanted to go over the lesson objectives with you for this session. By the end of this lesson, you will be grounded in an understanding of the messages that we're aiming to uplift online. Feeling confident and comfortable using our own messages and takeaways, putting them in your own words, and then having a baseline sort of database based on different hashtags that we're going to share with you all that you can use to follow. So 3 simple things, but as I said, it's really a packed agenda to get to these. And wanted to start off just beginning where we are. So if you are able to just take a moment to sort of think where you are on this spectrum, from like, I feel totally clueless, I have no idea, to I totally got this, let's go. You might be able to use a tool to mark on your screen, but at the very top, it should say something that says annotate. You can click on that and either do like a stamp and like stamp something on your screen. It's like a pen or pencil icon. You can click on it, should be at the top. Did anyone see that?
It might not be turned on, Amanda, I'm realizing.
Okay, no worries.
Sorry.
Oh,
no,
actually, no, some people have found it. Cool. So yeah, see where folks are feeling. I think, I do digital work all the time, and sometimes I'm like, yeah, I totally got this, let's go. I feel like in this time, it's so uncertain that even though I have particular skills that I feel like I can fall back on, I'm just like, I don't know. It's always a first time whenever we're getting new information or doing it in a new way. And with everything happening in our world, there's always changing conditions. So cool. So good to get just like a spectrum of where folks are. We're gonna revisit it at the end. So even if you don't have a chance to put your mark right there, think about it in your mind, and we'll revisit this at the end. So I'm just gonna clear that off. So we can go on to the next one. Hang on a second. Okay. So our values and getting the message right. You all should have received some readings, which are the Women's March Unity Principles and the Mijente Principles of Unity, similar titles. Just to recap really quickly, these documents are super important for organizations like us and for movements like ours to really ground ourselves in the purpose of the work that we're doing. So I'm just going to go over, just really quickly again from Mijente, just the top line ones. For Mijente, which is where I work and where I'm a member, we're Latinx and Chicanx people that are part of movements for justice and self-determination for all people. I think for this, our hope for this group of folks is that we'll all be, whatever our backgrounds are, whatever identities we claim, that we'll all be part of movement for justice and self-determination for all people. And at Mijente, we're pro-Black, pro-Indigena, pro-worker, pro-mujer, pro-lesbian, gay, bi, trans, and queer, pro-migrant, because we hold all of these identities and more, and our unity against shared oppression is central to our vision for change. So even though we're not going to explicitly explain like what intersectionality is or what intersectional feminism is, just wanted to ground us in that understanding that we all hold multiple identities, but we're working for the same things. We believe transformative change requires more from us, not just more of us. We're creating a leaderful space that is accountable, transparent, and continues evolving. We organize people, technology, and resources to get the goods. We are loyal to our ultimate goal of achieving el buen vivir. I don't know how to translate that well in English, which is why we just left it in Spanish, because there's not a good translation for it, but it's basically like well-being, quality of life. The literal translation might be welfare, which is in English, in the US context, is like a bad word, which tells you a little bit about our values. But we're loyal to our ultimate goal of achieving el buen vivir and self-determine our future, not to singular tactics, strategies, or dogma. We don't throw each other away. We acknowledge and value that part of the work is to recover, unlearn, and remember. And you can dig into those a little bit more if you didn't have the opportunity to already. But what I'm going to ask you to do is take some time, if you've already read the Principles of Unity of Mijente and Women's March, and think through what resonates most to you from these principles that our movements are grounded in. What do you have questions or curiosities about? And choose one of the principles and describe how it might apply to your digital defense work. I'm going to share this link in the chat. Let me make sure that anybody can edit. That's important. Anyone can edit. So you can make changes. So what you're gonna do is on the A column, add your name and add your responses to each question. Thanks, Noor. And if you're not able to edit it, just try refreshing the doc. You might have opened it a little quick. And we'll take some time, a couple minutes, just for folks to, maybe like 3 minutes. I actually don't think we need full 5 minutes, for folks to be processing and writing, starting to write your responses. And then in just a few minutes, we're also gonna put you into breakouts. So we'll split you up into breakouts and have 10 minutes for y'all to discuss. So the hope is that everyone is able to take notes from their group, and then we'll come back together and share. If folks have any questions or any technical difficulties during this time, let me know in the chat, and we'll try to get that squared away. I'm just gonna go back to sharing the presentation for now. So just to recap, what we're doing right now is we're gonna take some time to look at the spreadsheet and start entering our responses in there for a few minutes. And then once folks are ready, we'll break out into small groups so we can discuss out loud. Anyone who wasn't able to enter their information into the spreadsheet for technical reasons, if you wanted to enter your responses into the chat, you can totally do that too. So as we're coming back, I'm just gonna go ahead and call out some of the themes that I've been noticing. And so I see this word effective coming up a lot. How do we be effective while we're doing this work? And I so appreciate how, you know, folks are focused on that and really thinking about how to do this in an effective way. That's exactly what we're trying to do too. And then, yeah, just questions about staying safe while we're doing this work, security and things like that. I think digital security in particular are really great questions that were some like those topics we're not really going to cover today, but will be, you know, definitely part of this overall program. And as you can see, Noor has shared some resources in the chat. So really just loving like where these questions are going and where these conversations, where these conversations have been headed. I'm wondering if we could just have like 1 or 2 people share out from their group, like what was your top takeaway? Just like quick 1-minute recap. What was the takeaway of your group that stood out to you?
And if you can't unmute yourself, just raise your hand and I'll get you in. You should be able to unmute yourself though.
Okay.
This is Kay.
Well,
Hi, Kay.
What I thought seemed most prominent to me is everybody has a certain priority, but there's a lot of cross interest and intersectionality among everybody in the group. I think we all have a shared value system.
Awesome, that's great to hear. One other person to share out really quick.
Yeah, so I think what we kind of talked about in our room was how we all kind of haven't really experienced anything like this, but how we've definitely noticed it like making a difference in the elections that we've seen. And so I think it was kind of grounding in that, like all of us expressed that kind of concern, and we all kind of came from areas that were more conservative. So I think we're trying to look for ways to best like navigate online while fighting this misinformation.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so I feel like that sums it up so well. We all have different areas of focus and different priorities, but we all have shared goals and values. And our shared goal is really uplifting our values, uplifting the positive narratives that we want to see. And so I'm just going to go back and share my screen really quick again, because I wanted to share with you all sort of our guiding principles and approach of what we're trying to do online. As many of you noted, there's so much information from the alt-right, from trolls, all this negative discourse out there, and we want to be able to combat it effectively. And what we're trying to do is really shift from a place where we're playing defense against attacks, or that we're responding to this negative frame and all this negativity that folks are putting out there, and we're actually shifting to a place of offense, so that we're the ones that are putting out a positive vision for the future. Like right now, we're seeing, you know, the ways that our systems have failed us, all of the systemic inequality and justice just really play out in real time. How do we put out a positive vision for the future, a positive vision for what we want our world to look like, for what we want our communities to look like? So really, if you look at this slide, this is what we're trying to do overall. We want to share, oh, sorry, I went back on the side. Can everyone see my screen, by the way? I just want to make sure it's still working.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're, wrong slide again. Perdónenme, permítanme. Technical difficulties. I'm so into it. Okay. Here. We're here to promote a positive public narrative and discourse. The way that we can do that is sort of two overarching things. We want to give the right message, and by the right message, we want to give information that's accurate and that's compelling.
Remember, your screen didn't change, by the way.
It didn't?
No, we're seeing the agenda overview.
Oh, okay, odd.
There we go. Yes.
Yeah? Okay.
Yeah.
I think it's because I did a pop-out thing. My bad. All right, so we're here to promote a positive public narrative and discourse. As you see here at the top, underneath, there's the two other building blocks is that we want it to be the right message that we're giving folks. So the information, in order for it to be the right message, the information needs to be accurate. We don't want to combat misinformation with more misinformation, right? So we want to make sure that the information that we're putting out there is accurate and compelling. Different things that people have done, work that folks have done, in particular, thinking about the work that was done around same-sex marriage, folks found that actually some of the messages that are not compelling are the ones that are rights-based, which was hard for me when I learned that research, because somebody who really believes in human rights framework, but it turns out that that's not quite as compelling. You know, things that are compelling are, you know, personal stories. So instead of saying like, it's people's right to get married, was not a compelling argument. What was a compelling argument is people should be able to marry who they love. So emotional connection and personal stories, talking about, do you know someone in your family who's gay? Or, you know, talking about, well, my niece, this affects me personally because I'm queer, and things of that nature are actually a lot more compelling than using statistics. And we want to sometimes use sources to back up the information we're giving so that we have that practice, so we know the information is accurate. But the statistics alone, the facts alone, are not what compels folks. What's compelling to people is actually that personal story or that emotional connection we can make. And then we also want the messages that we're putting out there to be accessible. So we want to give a feeling of welcoming and inclusiveness. And a lot of times, you know, the critiques that we get and folks who criticize left or progressive movements is that we're not accessible because people have to be perfect. You know, there's cancel culture or the woke Olympics or whatever. And we're not here to do that. We're actually here to try to be welcoming and inclusive to folks, try to create a sense of common ground, and use plain language, you know, not use jargon or terms that are confusing for people. So those are sort of these building blocks of the messages that we're trying to construct that we're going to practice in just a little bit. If folks have questions about that, feel free to enter into the chat. But we wanted to ground in that before we go ahead and move into diving into a particular issue area, which is immigrants' rights. Can I have a volunteer to just read quickly? Could I have a volunteer to read this piece from the Women's Agenda that talks about immigrants' rights?
Yep, I can do that.
Thanks.
Okay, it's our moral duty to keep families together and empower all aspiring Americans to fully participate and contribute to our economy and society. We reject mass deportation and incarceration, family detention, violations of due process, and violence against queer and trans migrants. Immigration reform must establish a roadmap to citizenship and provide equal opportunities and workplace protections for all. We recognize that our call to action to love our neighbor is not limited to the United States because there is a global migration crisis. We believe migration is a human right and no human being is illegal.
Thank you so much. So I think that piece from the Women's Agenda by the Women's March really sums it up very succinctly. I'm also going to open up some space in the Google Sheet in case folks wanted to process in there about what do you think in your own words, if you had to say what is the overarching message of what we're fighting for immigrants' rights. But I wanted to flag quickly that one big challenge in this area is that there's a lot of negative messages that we see put out there constantly about immigrants, you know, that immigrants are criminals, they make our community less safe, that we're bringing disease, we're taking jobs, all of these really fear-mongering things. And unfortunately, sometimes the responses that are well-intentioned, that have been playing defense on those messages, have also been really problematic. So right here in the bottom left, you'll see a note that says to avoid these traps. Avoid qualifying, justifying, or putting limits on migrants' humanity. What do I mean by that? For example, when people say things like, oh, dreamers, you know, only referring to people who were brought to the United States as children and saying like, we should protect dreamers, but actually leaving out other immigrants. It's no fault of their own, they're brought here as kids. So that's sort of justifying putting limits on migrants' humanity. When we're talking about immigrant rights, we're talking about all immigrants. Another example is saying things like, except for, you know, those who have committed a crime. Actually, there's lots of people who may have made a mistake, but just because they're an immigrant, that doesn't mean that they're less, you know, worthy of respect as a non-immigrant person. So when we talk about immigrants' rights, we're not talking about, you know, leaving anybody out. And we're not trying to put limits or justification. For example, another one that's really common is that immigrants, we should value them because they have a good impact on the economy. That one really hurts my heart because I know it's really well-intentioned, but that is the type of thinking that justifies the order, the public charge order that the Trump administration just put out, that if you you know, have to ever use any sort of public services, that you won't be eligible for citizenship if you use food stamps or any sort of public assistance. And it's really ableist against disabled folks. So saying like, you have no value to us if you can't produce wealth or contribute to the economy. Immigrants are only valuable because of our labor. They do the jobs that Americans won't do, is another kind of way of saying that also falls into this other trap that I've noted here, that perpetuates this white supremacist us versus them or native versus foreign frame. Saying immigrants do jobs that Americans won't do is actually still continuing to use a problematic frame, instead of being accepting and widening, which is what we want to do. So we'll show some examples of that and real time and try to work these out. So I wanted to show this to y'all. I might have to actually start a new screen share because it's going to pop out so it can be bigger and more readable. So bear with me one moment while I pop this screen out and reshare it to make it larger. While I'm doing that, if you wanted to note in the spreadsheet any takeaways or questions that you have around what it is that we're actually fighting for when we talk about immigrants' rights, you can do that. Okay, here we go. So this is sort of the framework that we're looking at to think through responses online. On the left-hand side is what, for example, like a troll, like negative person would say in this column right here, and also explains the fear structure behind it. And it's important for us to acknowledge and be aware of these pieces, but we're not actually going to be responding to these pieces. We're not actually going to be responding to these pieces at this stage. What we're going to be responding to is the ally on this who made a good try to respond to the troll, and we're going to be responding to them. So I'm going to walk through that so that can make sense. Let's say it's a Instagram post. A troll has posted something like a picture of a wall, and it's like, build the wall. There's a comment on there from an ally, says, FYI, we're a country of immigrants. Well-intentioned, good try. What we're going to do is we're going to comment responding to this comment and make a constructive addition. For example, yeah, ally, totally, it's so hard to see commenters dehumanizing fellow human beings, but your comment warmed my heart. And here's a great article that talks about the asylum process and why people come to the border without documentation first. Another example, let's say somebody comments, they're bringing violence and drugs with them. A good try from an ally responds to that initial post or comment and says, white men cause mass violence in the US, but you don't see plans to prevent them from coming into the country. Valid point, good try. And this is an example of a constructive addition that you could make to reinforce like that ally's good try of putting out a positive message. Immigration does not increase violence. You hit it on the head, and as this article shows, this report backs you up. And linking to articles in both of these examples. One thing right off the bat, you don't have to always have an article to link to, but it can be helpful. So these two examples have articles that are linked to, but it's not a requirement. So they're just examples. Now what I wanted y'all to try is see if you can take a stab at doing a constructive addition of your own. So in these examples, a troll makes one of these negative comments, and then an ally does a good try, first response. What are you going to say to that ally to help reinforce their attempt and to build on it in a positive way that is creating a positive public narrative that's an effective message and that feels accessible? So what I want you all to do is take a stab at this, and if you feel comfortable sharing your attempt for the constructive addition, just know which example you are doing and put it in the chat so everyone can see in the group chat here what your constructive addition might be. It is, I will say, I feel like these ones are really hard because it's pretty nuanced. But, you know, I think as long as you're giving positive reinforcement, that's a good thing. You're moving in a good direction. So yes, type your responses in the chat. And you can send them to me privately if you just don't want other folks to see them. But if you don't mind, you know, for other folks seeing and pulling out good examples, you can go ahead and share it with everyone in the chat. So that would be great.
And for folks who are not familiar how to do that, right? You press the little chat box on the to button. You can click on it. It's to everyone as default. You can click on Amanda Chavez as for a private message, and you just type your message in there and click enter.
I'm seeing a few responses from folks in the group chat, and I know we're getting a few more. So maybe we can read them out, or however we want to pick a few and present out.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you now, yes.
Okay, I wasn't sure if I was muted or not. Okay, great. Yeah, it would be great. So I think one great example here from Eileen, thanks Eileen for sharing. Employment is difficult for everyone. Maybe look at some additional sources to help gain your knowledge of the work environment. I think that like that first line, employment is difficult for everyone, is really great because what we're seeing here is it's like a back and forth us versus them frame. And by saying employment is difficult for everyone, you're really expanding that and opening it up to say like, yeah, you're right. Like this is a struggle. Like this is a struggle for all working people. You know, finding a job is a real issue. And let's think of ways that, you know, we could work together. Yeah, and I really like this one from Crystal. All individuals deserve the chance to find a job, including you and including immigrants. I will say, we're not responding directly to the troll, but saying like referencing, including like you, this person, right, who made the comment, like everyone deserves to be able to work. So yeah, I think there's a lot of great stuff in here. Is there anyone for the second? Does anybody have a try for the second one? Freedom of speech from Eileen helps shape our country's democratic values. We should consider ways that our speech encourages active participation in the seeking of new information. Yeah, definitely. And I think like what we want to reinforce in particular for that comment is that they're sticking up for the rights of everyone, no matter where they're from, and the right to critique something. And I think this maybe was in reference to the comment that Trump made to folks who actually are like citizens. And so there's like a little bit of a racial xenophobia undertone as well there. And so I think like part of the reason why the response from the ally is a little bit ineffective is it doesn't quite go as far to make that connection between like, yes, like everyone deserves to have freedom of speech, like regardless of where you were born or where your parents or your ancestors are from. Like to say that certain people should go back, like that's actually discrimination and we don't stand for that. Reinforcing positive values, absolutely. Cool. Let me see, there's so many. Okay, it's fundamental. Express concerns. Yep. So this one from Crystal is really good too. I'm trying to be careful to not accidentally read a private one out loud, because I'm assuming if you send it to me privately, then that means that you don't want it to be read aloud. Okay, and then here's a good response with a link to a source. Actually, it's not accurate. It's a myth, and immigrants create new jobs. I think that's great, and it avoids falling into the trap of immigrants take jobs that Americans won't do, but it directly contradicts the misinformation that's being put out there. Yeah, great. So I'm gonna just stop my screen for a second because I want to share. This doesn't mean that these are the right answers, but I just wanted to share sort of the one that I came up with. Please keep sharing your ideas in the chat. And remember, we're not actually responding directly to the troll. We're responding to the ally. So it can reference the fear structure behind, you know, what the troll was saying, and it can reference what the troll was saying, but we really want to be talking to the ally because we're not trying to make it a back and forth, and we're not trying to play defense, right? We're trying to play offense. So we definitely want to be talking to the ally versus talking to the troll.
Yeah, and statistically, we know that that method works in shifting hearts and minds, right? Somebody asked yesterday, are we right now targeting folks who are in the middle, or are we targeting folks who are allies? We're really working with folks who are a little undecided in the middle and folks who are progressive so they don't shift away from our values.
Exactly. Yeah, okay. So I want to bring us back to this piece of the presentation that is our building blocks really quickly. So I'm just going to share that again. And here in the chat, I'm putting, these are the things that I came up with. So this is the first one. I'm not saying this is the right answer, but this is what I came up with. So for the first one, right, immigration actually has a positive effect on the economy. And in one of the wealthiest countries in the world, we should all be able to get a good job. Working people have to stick together. This article exposes the lies that billionaires use to divide us. And so what I was trying to do with this message, and what I see y'all definitely doing a great job employing, are these building blocks of promoting a positive public narrative and discourse, trying to get that right message that feels compelling, and that is also accessible and brings folks in, even keeping in mind our audience of people who are watching this conversation that plays out, so that we're not using us versus them language. We're not using jargon and stuff that feels inaccessible. One other thing that I wanted to share with you all, and we can share the slides with you so you have all the hashtags, is some good hashtags to follow for groups like mine and many other grassroots groups and organizations that are doing really good work around immigrants' rights, to just be staying up to date. I saw someone have put in the chat earlier about if there's coordinated efforts to release immigrants from detention. Yes, and I would say the best folks to follow for that information would be Detention Watch Network. We've signed on to their letter and have done a lot of work in particular around deportation, defense, and releasing folks from detention. So follow these hashtags and make sure that you're staying up to date on all of this information. And if there's questions, again, as I said, feel free to add them in the spreadsheet. Feel free to also share any questions. I know, as Akif said, once you graduate into your cohort, we'll be around to help with any of these questions. I know it can feel kind of tricky or overwhelming, but I think just getting into the practice and doing these exercises really helps. So I appreciate all your, como se dice, your willingness to jump in and put yourself out there and to make a go at it.
And we'll have a lot of time to practice and perfect our responses over the next couple of days and the next couple of weeks and the next couple of months, right? So again, we will all be in a Slack group together building, right? We'll have experts in there. If you ever have a question, you're like, I don't know what to do. I don't know if this is okay for me to say this, we're going to be here to support you, right? Perfecto. Any other questions for Amanda on immigration? We can type it into the chat box, right? Let's give it a second. And then next up, we'll bring on screen Ellie Langford. He's the Director of Research at NARAL Pro-Choice America. And Ellie's going to lead us through the next portion of the presentation, which is our dive into reproductive justice, health, rights, and freedoms.
We have a question around sort of what intervention looks like without feeding the trolls on comments. I know this is something that's a little bit more technical, but I'm wondering if anybody could speak to the experience of Amanda or Keeb or others of, responding to comments or a thread where a troll is saying what they're saying without necessarily exposing or sort of feeding the algorithm and letting other people see it even more. So I'm wondering if you could speak to that a little bit.
I can jump in and add some context there, and then if Amanda, if you have anything you want to add, and I know Ellie does a lot of work around disinformation in digital spaces as well. So feel free, y'all. Right. One of the things, right, is that we know that a lot of young folk, a lot of people in general, get radicalized in these threads. Right. We know a lot of folks are on social media, and just given our personalities, we follow things that when conversations are popping off and there's a fight, we go to the fight, right, in that digital space. And a lot of time that misinformation, that like the messages get reinforced, right? So we know that these conversations, these threads are gonna be viral or more clickable than most other threads that are happening, right? So our job is really going in there by reinforcing the positive comments and adding substance to it, right? We're shifting the narrative, we're shifting the sentiment, right? You're almost a voice of reason, right? Or not reason, but I'm going to say justice, of compassion, of, being a defender of online spaces, right? We use really interesting also sentiment measuring tools to help us track and direct these conversations that we'll get into later on in our time together as a cohort. Any additional?
Yeah, and I was just going to add, I think it's not a case that there's going to be a dead post that we're gonna, that folks are gonna be commenting on. It's something like you mentioned, it's something that's already popping off in the comment section. And what we're trying to do is actually uplift a more positive narrative than what's happening. But I do see that concern, and I think that's valid. And so this is why we're actually encouraging to really go into those spaces where the sentiment may be negative already, and actually try to shift it rather than go into somewhere where the sentiment is overwhelmingly positive and then only focus on the person who is the troll, right?
Yeah.
That's not the strategy that we're trying to push.
And tomorrow during the training, we'll walk through some best practices and methods in identifying threads that we can make the most impact in. So that's coming up tomorrow, right? So more on that. On that note, just be mindful of time. Can we turn it over to Ellie?
Hi, everybody. I'll also talk a little bit about that because the reproductive rights, justice, freedom space is a little different, I think, sometimes from some of the other issue areas on here. And I know that in particular, the way that the anti-choice people kind of stack on an issue really elevates their content in a way where it's getting elevated no matter what we do. And anything that we can do to, like Amanda said, shift the conversation towards our side and change the narrative a little bit is valuable. So I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but I agree with what Amanda said, that we're really trying to kind of move the needle in the conversation, and that is incredibly valuable on its own. But before we go into any details, I'll give you all a little bit about me and my background. As Akib mentioned, my name's Ellie, she, her pronouns. I am the NARAL research director, which basically means that I run NARAL's opposition research program, contribute to our message testing and polling program. I'm usually the expert on the far right messaging that we are testing against. So kind of the person who talks a little bit about what extremism looks like now and the current trends on the conservative / far right that we need to be aware of in our polling programs. And then I also lead our anti-disinformation work, as Akib mentioned. I do want to flag, there are a lot of different terms in the reproductive rights, justice, health, freedom space NARAL is typically considered a reproductive rights organization. We have recently been using the term reproductive freedom because we have found through a bunch of recent research that it really helps us take a bolder stance and really lean into some of the issues that haven't been fully addressed, that the progressive or democratic communities have kind of leaned away from, and that it really enables us to activate people in a really positive way. That is not to diminish any of the other frames that are out there. You know, I definitely work with a ton of people in the reproductive justice community in particular, and obviously people who do more kind of direct health provider work in the reproductive health space. But just so we're all on the same page about language here, I put reproductive freedom on the slide because reproductive freedom is what my organization is really leaning into right now. And that lens may be a little bit narrower than some other people. So if you have questions about any of the issues that aren't specifically one of the issues that NARAL works on, but kind of fit into kind of the broader reproductive justice space, I am happy to kind of take those questions to a partner or kick that to someone else who can answer any of those things. But yeah, just want to be really clear about kind of my lens in this space, and always happy to tap partners to come in as well. Cool. Amanda is going to be controlling my slides because I am a little bit terrible with the presentation technology. So Amanda, will you switch to the next slide, and I'll just continue giving you the verbal clues as we go. Apologies everybody for that. So I'm a researcher, and I will flag for you in advance that my conversation is going to be a little bit weedsy. So hopefully you'll bear with me and tell me in the chat if you have any questions or if I'm going too deep and any of that. I also really appreciate all of the positive NARAL messages. That's really lovely and so wonderful to see. So I'm just going to start, I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this slide, and I'm going to start by kind of giving you all some really high level context about the things that I'm seeing kind of in the repro space in general. I think to start, it's really important that we underline that reproductive rights, freedom, justice, whatever we're talking about, has always had majority support. Even back in the 1970s, pre-Roe, reproductive rights were still a majority positive polling issue. Most of America has always been pro-choice, and that includes Republicans as well. The Republican Party used to be over 60% pro-choice. That has gone down, but they're still somewhere in the 40s. So this is a much more widely popular issue than I think we are led to believe by the conversation in media, in politics, and online. And I just think it's really important that we all kind of start with that understanding. Despite what you might see online, we are in the high majority, and it's not even close. Actually, in the past year, we've seen reproductive freedom grow to record highs. Like I said, we've always been the majority, but the support that we're seeing right now is higher than it's been in decades. At NARAL, we typically use 7 in 10 Americans support reproductive freedom as a shorthand. Those numbers are actually a little bit higher now. I think the most recent poll that we've seen was a 77% support for the standard set in Roe v. Wade, which we consider a floor and a minimum at NARAL, and are constantly working to expand reproductive freedom beyond that standard. But I think it really does go to show just how kind of universally held the pro-choice position is. All that being said, anti-choice activists are still out there, and they really are not stupid. They know that they have a losing argument. They've known it for a really long time, and they've spent the past several decades making up for it by pushing disinformation, intimidating pro-choice advocates, and also pro-choice elected officials from speaking out in support of the issue. And they've just poured a ton of energy and money in particular into making sure that they're louder on the issue than we are across the conversation. That was true before the rise of social media, but it's carried over into social media. And I just think it's kind of a really important level setting thing that we all understand, because the reality is that even though we have a lot of advantages in this conversation, they really are controlling the public conversation in really dangerous ways. And that's something that, you know, we're all here to address. So to dig into that a little bit, I think one of the things that I've noticed in the research that I really want to flag for you all is that there is actually a completely measurable imbalance in the conversation that distorts how the public is able to engage in the issue of reproductive rights and freedom online. And by reproductive rights, I'm talking about abortion, but also contraception and kind of the related issues. Anti-choice advocates are actually the minority of people who talk about reproductive rights online, but they actually produce the vast majority of the content. We also have research that shows that they are much more consistent with their messaging. They repeat the same language, they circle back to the same consistent narratives, and they're really aggressive about amplifying each other, which I think, from what I've seen, really differentiates them from some other far-right activists and other issues. There's a lot of money on the anti-choice side that's been poured into this space and into amplifying and developing their messages online. And that creates the type of kind of feedback loops and echo chambers that Amanda was talking about, and that we're really working to take apart a little bit with this project. They're also really not shy about pushing disinformation or attacking people who tell the truth. And that is just a reality. There's a lot of hate speech and things like that that happen when people engage on this issue. And then their key tactic that I really want to flag is that they flood the zone. And that's actually a Steve Bannon term that he used to describe how they ran Trump's online campaign. But basically their tactic is to saturate the public discourse with so much false and misleading content that it can't really be effectively combated, and that you can't really, that it's really hard to find out the truth or sort through just kind of all of the mess. So they try and make it just as messy as possible, and know that, you know, if there is clarity in the issue, we end up winning, which is not something that they want. So meanwhile, the pro-choice majority actually produces a minority of the content. And generally, although I'm not necessarily talking about you all, because I know you all are really leaning into this issue, pro-choice advocates tend to show a lack of confidence in talking about these issues and worry about the types of facts that they might be challenged on because they know that anti-choice activists are really aggressive about doing that. And then when they do speak up, pro-choice advocates can sometimes amplify problematic narratives by repeating back the things that anti-choice people have been saying when they're debunking it. So anyway, those are all the kind of things that we're here to push back against. So anyway, that was long-winded. Directing our content, or our attention to the content on the slide, I'm going to take a page out of Amanda's book and ask someone to read for us the women's agenda, which is included on the screen. Can anyone volunteer?
I can do that. Sure. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm. Go for it.
All right. We believe in reproductive freedom. We do not accept any federal, state, or local rollbacks, cuts, or restrictions on our ability to access quality reproductive health care services, birth control, HIV/AIDS care and prevention, or medically accurate sexuality education. This means open access to safe, legal, affordable abortion and birth control for all people, regardless of income, location, or education. We understand that we can only have reproductive justice when people have the ability to control their own bodies, their sexuality, their gender, their work, and their reproduction. To that end, all people, regardless of income, race, ethnicity, immigration status, gender identity, sexual orientation, age, and disability, must have access, not just the right, access to reproductive health care.
Awesome, thank you. I was shifting through to try and figure out who it was who was talking. Was it Julia?
Lauren.
Lauren, thank you. Thank you for reading that. Really appreciate it. I'm also looking through the chat now. We did get one question about using the word abortion and how Planned Parenthood and other advocates are trying to encourage people to say that term more often to destigmatize it. But the writer said, you know, there's some living in a conservative area, it can shut down the conversation and people will turn off when they hear that word. So ask for thoughts. I'm gonna dig into some of that a little bit later, but I think that it's really important that we raise our voices across this issue. And I think getting more people more and more comfortable talking about abortion is a critical part of that. I think it's also important to kind of know your audiences. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the things that we need to do to move the conversation in a positive way. So while I think that it's really important that we talk about abortion and we get people to say it, there are also many other important things to do in the conversation as well, which we'll talk about in a minute. Another comment in here: how do you defend pro-choice ideas against religious beliefs or a country's political ideologies? Yeah, I think that one's another one that we can dig into a little bit. I think we make a really careful distinction between personal beliefs and public policy, which I think is kind of the standard in this issue. It's one thing to make individual decisions about your reproductive freedom. It's a totally other thing to legislate everybody else's. So that's kind of distinction. I'm gonna quickly move along because I'm getting a time check from Akib, but just a couple more things to flag before we move to the next slide, and then I promise I will move a little bit quicker. I linked one resource on here, the Anti-Choice Propaganda Playbook, which is a Medium post that my team put together, I think in January this year. I know Akib has a couple of other resources that I shared and that are kind of in that bucket of resources that you all are getting. So just a plug to read through some of that. But this resource on this slide is one that's designed to kind of help you navigate some of the themes that are common on the other side. And then just a couple of notes before I go to the next slide. I'm gonna say this multiple times in the 10 minutes that I have left, but the biggest trap that I can't emphasize enough is that the anti-choice advocates really work hard to erase pregnant people from the conversation and make it so that you can't have empathy with somebody who is looking for different types of reproductive health care. They do that in a ton of different ways. They do that by increasing stigma, by just making them literally invisible in the images and language that they use, even in the pronouns that they're using. But I want to emphasize that finding a way to increase people's general awareness of pregnant people or people who might need access to abortion or any other type of reproductive health care goes a hugely long way to shifting this whole conversation. So if there's only one thing that you remember from my presentation here, it's find ways to make pregnant people visible, or pregnant people or people who need kind of the range of reproductive health care. Also, I'm very intentionally saying pregnant people here because it's important for us to recognize that people of all genders can get pregnant and get abortion, and that a lot of the online dialogue is about cisgender narratives, but it's important that we're being really inclusive with our language and all of that. So yes, I will move on to the next slide real quick and run through a couple of actual language and tactics that we see from the anti-choice side. I just mentioned the first one. Erasing pregnant people from the conversation, again, is kind of the overriding theme that I see from the anti-choice movement. It's not always erasure. Sometimes it can be marginalizing them or infantilizing them and making it seem like people are not capable of making their own decisions about their reproductive lives. But again, whatever we can do to center the people who need access to reproductive health care in the conversation and make people start to feel empathy towards what their situation might be like, or that they might be in that situation at some point, the better off we are. I mean, that is kind of the whole ball game in my mind, making sure that people can really understand kind of the human consequences of pushing abortion or contraception bans or things like that. Other tactics that they use are disparaging and dehumanizing not just pregnant people, but doctors and other pro-choice advocates. So you may see some of that online as you're talking about this issue. And then they also work to really claim the moral high ground. That comes in a bunch of different ways, but it can be all through things like hiding behind religion and saying that their religion requires them to legislate on other people's reproductive freedom, or that they are the true feminists and they're just looking out for women or for female fetuses. They even have been leaning into racial justice narratives lately and trying to co-opt some of that. So that's just another thing to flag. Amanda, can you switch the slides? Great. So as we think about what we can be saying to push back against some of these problematic narratives, I think the most important thing for us to do is to raise the volume. Like I mentioned earlier, there is a gigantic imbalance in the conversation, and anti-choice activists really aren't shy about pushing disinformation. They produce a much higher volume of content, and they really are drowning us out, even though we are the majority of people. The pro-choice minority, again, produces the majority of the content. And what I've heard from our folks about why we're not talking about this issue that much or that consistently is a lack of confidence in facts, not feeling super conversant in the issues or the language, and when they do speak up, being afraid that of getting backlash or that they might amplify problematic narratives. The good thing is that you really can be confident. From a ton of kind of the messaging and cognitive psychology research that I've seen on this issue, there's a ton of just evidence to back up that you're actually the best messenger to engage within your own networks. People are much more likely to listen to people that they see as being part of their network or in their kind of social sphere when they're deciding what information to read, engage with, or even share online. And you really do have the opportunity to prepare your friends and family for the types of disinformation that they might be exposed to, which is a tactic we call inoculation, so that it really doesn't have the chance to stick with them in the first place. And you can encourage them to think about kind of what restrictions on reproductive freedom might look like in real people's lives, and get them to talk about that and really boost the empathy. So those are some of the big ideas. I have way more notes on some kind of cognitive psychology tricks that we've been researching and digging into. I won't go too much into that because I'm getting low on time, but I will make a plug for some upcoming research that my team will be releasing on this, and I can send it to Akib to pass on to y'all or post in the Slack channel down the road. But just a quick kind of overview of that. Don't repeat myths. Repetition increases memory retention, but also belief. So whenever we're engaging online, it's really important that we push the narrative that we want people to hear without actually repeating the language that is problematic. The more people hear something, the more likely they are to agree with it. And that doesn't even take into account their ideology. They might be somebody who would typically really disagree with something, but familiarity really does boost agreement and belief. Be careful of provoking defensiveness. There are a whole lot of identity and social issues kind of baked into the way people are able to engage with and incorporate content into their brains. And if they feel like their personal identity is on the line, or if they feel attacked or like you're judging them, they shut down and they're not listening. That's why I just want to make a plug for exactly the frame that Amanda was talking about, engaging with the positive arguments and finding ways to connect with people on a positive front is the easiest way to make sure that the conversation stays open. We also have some tactics to kind of deal with the situations when we're not in a positive conversation to start off, but that's kind of the first one. So just avoiding defensiveness and finding that common ground to start on, and opening the conversation. And then just kind of avoiding getting into kind of a back and forth tit for tat with the radical right. It creates opportunities for people to hear problematic narratives, can amplify problematic narratives, and a much better way to bring people around is to use questions to allow them to walk themselves towards the truth. Okay, I talked a ton. I am down to my last 2 minutes, and we now have the exercise. So I'm just going to quickly let you all take a look at the examples here on this slide, and I'll walk through them a bit. These are some of this is the same fear structure that Amanda was talking about, and on the right shows kind of both an ineffective response and a constructive addition that we might bring to the conversation. I'll just quickly run through these, and then we'll skip the interactive one, and then we can talk a little bit, use our last minute or two to talk a little bit more about the questions, because I haven't really been reading all of them. So the first one is the most common narrative, this argument that abortion is murder comes up again and again. You'll probably see it online. An ineffective response might be, or an effective response, but kind of not exactly centering pregnant people, would be kind of leaning into that conversation and getting into a tit for tat with the right. If you're so pro-life, why aren't you promising laws to help babies after they're born? A more constructive addition would be making sure to bring in the pregnant person into the conversation and talk about how important abortion is to protecting pregnant people's health, and make sure that you kind of center the person who needs the reproductive care in that conversation. In the second example, it's an attack on abortion providers. It's kind of the dehumanization, fear-mongering angle. And the response is, do you hear childbirth is dangerous? A more effective response here would be highlighting what we actually want people to take away. So rather than kind of, again, just getting into this back and forth, making sure that you're inserting and amplifying the information that we want people to remember, which is that abortion is safe, and that the restrictions are actually what are putting people in danger. Amanda, I'll have you switch to the next slide, but I know I'm at time. So Akib, if you can give me some direction. I think we don't have to do the exercise since we're low on time, and I know it's late for everyone. Akib, do we have a couple of minutes to just do a little bit more of a free form kind of question?
Yeah, let's do, we can do 2 more minutes and I'll condense our ending, right? And folks, if you have general questions, things like that, be sure to type them into column G on the spreadsheet Amanda shared earlier, and we'll up that link again. But Ellie, 2 minutes, floor's yours. I'm so sorry it's all so condensed, y'all. It's a lot of info, a lot of good info.
Great. Okay, cool, I'm just sorting through. Eileen asked, how do you suggest limiting the conversation from getting purposely negative or gruesome language to being more positive and productive, especially for younger populations? I think it's always a good aspiration to make the conversation as productive as possible, but especially in the repro space, the reality is that the anti-choice movement has had a lot of leeway and a lot of control for a long time in this narrative, and it probably will be negative. We've been doing some research lately about ways to kind of open up new parts of the conversation and get people to think a little bit more deeply about these issues in ways that don't initially just send people running to kind of their pro-life, pro-choice camps. And the way that seems to be most effective right now is to get people talking about the bans that we've been seeing moving at the state level. Georgia, Alabama, there are a whole bunch of them. And start to use questions to ask people, what would those bans actually look like if they were implemented? What would enforcement look like? What would it take? What would the government be doing? What is actually being proposed? Because I think a lot of people who have maybe complicated feelings about abortion in particular haven't really thought through what legislating on this issue looks like, and getting people to do a little bit of that work in their own head and kind of mull over yeah, I mean, how would you know if somebody had gotten an abortion? Or what would you do if somebody had been accused of getting an abortion in a state like Alabama that was trying to outlaw it? The scenarios get pretty surveillance-y and pretty scary and very quickly. And I've seen actually in some of our focus groups, even kind of white men in Illinois who's come in saying that they're super strong Catholics and incredibly anti-choice, want to ban it all, do a 180 on the issue once they realize kind of what criminalization might be entailed with some of the policies. So that's a little dense for that one thing, but I think questions and getting people to think about the real life situations is generally a good place to start. What are your thoughts? I'll just do one more. What are your thoughts on the idea that men have no right to have a say on the issue because it does not affect them and is not their bodies? Oh, I love that one. That's such a good one. I've just been doing a ton of research around the country with white men in particular in focus groups, trying to get them to engage on this issue and figure out if there is a way to give them a voice that is not destructive but is productive. I cannot tell you the number of men I have seen cry in focus groups out of like a relief and male bonding and just like fear of kind of feeling judged discussing this issue and just having that kind of be released when we give them a space that, I mean, they're all surrounded by men, so they feel very safe. But I think that there's a real emotion there of men wanting to, like, really having real feelings about reproductive freedom and caring about their own reproductive freedom and maybe their partners as well, if they have a partner, and just not feeling like they have permission to engage. So we've been kind of working on, and this is ongoing research, on ways to give them a role that is positive and not too controlling and things like that, because it can get bad, or, you know, that there are ways that it can go wrong. And giving them the space to be kind of a freedom fighter, an advocate, even a protector, although that can sometimes get a little patriarchal, actually has been looking like it's the kind of thing that can bring men around in really helpful ways. So anyway, I'll have more on that in, well, we'll see. The research is kind of slowing down during coronavirus, but I'll have more on that in a couple of months, and I can send it to Akib.
Yes, and there are some books and podcasts and things coming out as well, which I'm super, super excited about, and we'll be working together on.
Oh yeah, can I do a quick plug for that?
Yeah, please.
Cool. Yeah, so one big project I've been working on for the past year now is I'm co-authoring a book with Elise Hogue, my boss. It's about kind of this whole world and how disinformation has become such an incredible tool of the anti-choice movement, but also how it's really merged with the broader radical right, and kind of like the Trump story a little bit and all of that. The COVID thing is messing up our printing schedule, and so I do not have a release date. We'll see how long this whole situation lasts. But we also have a podcast that we'll be pushing out on the same topic. The title is The Lie That Binds. And the lie is basically that what they're after is banning abortion when there is so much more behind that, and they've really constructed this issue to be kind of a power play on their side. Anyway, our website's going to be up really soon. I will send Akib the details, but the podcast is done. And so we'll be releasing that again, depending on kind of how the news cycle plays out soonish. So a couple weeks, month maybe. I'll keep in touch.
Perfect. So we'll continue building, right? Again, our friends at Mijente and NARAL Pro-Choice America and other groups that we are working with or other partners, right? We're all digital defenders for all of our groups, right? So we'll be supporting and be talking and chatting in and touching bases with experts from across fields. So again, with that, we have come to a close of this lesson 2. I'm going to do 2 quick housekeeping points. Then I'll bring us all unmute everyone so we can say our goodbyes, right? And give some love and appreciation and thanks to Amanda and Ellie for the wisdom you've imparted in all of us today, right?